The buzzword, robotic process automation. Let's learn more. So let's talk to somebody who does it. Michael Grace, who's an expert in the field, joins us today on this bonus episode of The Business of Tech. Well, Michael, I've been excited to have you on to talk some robotic process automation. But before we dive in, give everybody a little bit of a background, like what is your business and what services you're delivering out in the market?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're in the business of business automation. And so we do a lot of back office, HR, supply chain, and finance, your core business, your payrolls, right? Keeping large companies operating. So we do ERP implementation. We use a software called Infor. And we have consultants across the U.S. Serving healthcare and finance and retail and a variety of different industries and cities and states. And then we also have a strategy arm, and part of that strategy arm is really robotic process automation, like you mentioned, where we're really going out and helping folks take advantage of automation of the business processes so that they can minimize cost, improve efficiency, and speed.
All right, so I'm going to ask you, tell me what your definition of robotic process automation is, particularly like what are you telling your customers that it is?
I love it. Yeah, we have a lot of slides on what robotic process automation really is because I think there's a lot of confusion and the industry has had a lot of noise around it. And so robotic process automation really is emulation of human behavior within an electronic software environment, meaning things that you do on a regular basis, like check and read your email and take action upon that based on what's in the email, logging into systems and software such as an ERP or an EHR, and taking certain actions based on information that you have. All of these types of everyday activities that we do are really capable within robotic process automation.
All right, let's take that from the abstract to an example. Walk me through like an example of a successful project that you've done around RPA.
Yeah, we really look at the business process first, right? So we'll go into a company and we'll say, I like to say, where do we have unhappy people, right? Where do we have people that are doing jobs that has to be done, absolutely necessary? So in the case, like let's use an accounts payable department, which is usually of large cost to an organization. There's usually, depending on the volume of invoices that a company has, the bigger, the more people they have in their AP department. Well, what they really do is take an invoice that's mailed or hopefully not, hopefully it's emailed at least, or sent in a file, and they open that and they read it, right? And then they turn to their ERP system or their AP system and they start just tapping away on the keyboard, right? And there's all this crazy keyboard action where they're entering in the vendor and the invoice and all this information that's on this piece of paper. And then, it goes through an approval workflow and then it winds up in a check payment. Really, when we look at that simplest of examples, right? Everybody pays bills. We pay bills. You pay bills. I pay bills. Large companies pay bills. That can all be automated through the use of OCR technologies and natural language processing, and then really giving that to the robot that we call a digital workforce, right, or digital labor. They really then can do that keystroke entry, and they can, in the simplest of cases, route it for approval, get the approval back, put it into the payment stream, and really that frees up those AP folks. We've had companies take their AP folks, and now they're doing like research where maybe things didn't match, right? Maybe they couldn't get the invoice to just auto go through the system. There was a problem. Well, now those resources get redeployed to solve those problems. But the simplest, the bulk of it, the 70 to 80% of invoices are now on autopilot, right? They're going through, they're getting approved. We're doing cash management, making sure that we hold the money and get our float and things like that. But it's all automated. And now our people are doing more meaningful things. And guess what? Even though that's harder work, they're a lot happier to be doing that than just mindlessly keying on keyboards.
What are the questions you're asking customers to probe for those ideas, right? So how do you get that process rolling for them to find a good thing to automate?
That's a great question, and where a lot of companies fail. They think robotic process automation, either they've been told by vendors or they believe that RPA can automate everything. And that's not true, right? There's a lot of processes that are automatable for sure, but it doesn't justify the cost, right? There's no ROI in it, meaning maybe it's something you do once a year. And it's like, sure, but the bot costs ten to $15,000, and the process to automate it, right? The consulting effort to create that bot could cost $30,000 to $40,000. So I've got $60,000 invested in this process. I do once a year, and I save 15 minutes. The ROI on that is like decades, right? And so while it's automatable, while it could be done, that doesn't make sense. So what we really do is come in and go, what are the processes that we do every day, that we do a lot of, that are all system based? RPA has evolved to the point where we can look at logs and we can find where do people log into the same screens and where do they log into the same applications. And we can be like, well, this person's doing these types of things every single day. Let's go look at that process because that's probably automatable, right? So it's got a lot of sniffing technologies where we can help them. But usually when we go in and we go, hey, here's what the technology does, we spend the first 30 minutes or so really educating them on RPA. Man, it's like opening Pandora's box. They're like, oh my gosh, can it solve this? And we wind up with this whiteboard full of processes that then we really have to say, okay, let's make some sense out of this. Let's quantify and qualify these, and then let's prioritize these, which leads to a roadmap, right? And now the company has a strategy on how to deploy RPA. Go to the highest value, lowest cost first. Let's go kill that. That starts paying for the program, right? Now we're paying for it and we're getting value, and that justifies us going down and getting some of the less value, harder things once we start paying our way.
All right, you just alluded to it, so I want to get a little bit more insight. How are you linking to that ROI? What's the way that you're tying it together to make it into a concrete number that you can quantify?
Yeah, we really, a lot of people when we say, oh, the ROI on this process is, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're like, no way, that's crazy. There's no way we're spending that. And we're like, okay, is this your process, right? So we'll do a process diagram, and they'll go, yeah, that's our process. And we're like, okay, do you agree that these tasks take this many minutes? You go, well, yeah. Okay, do you agree that your employee doing this task makes generally this amount of money, which breaks down to this much per day, per hour, per minute? Well, yes. Okay, now that we have that, we're performing simple math. Do you agree that math hasn't changed in hundreds of years? Yes. Okay, so then I'm going to do the equation. That is the number per time they do this process. You told us they do this process 25 times a day. They're here 5 days a week. The process exists on all those days, times however many work days, in a year. This is your annual cost. And then we hold ourselves accountable, right? And we say, here's where we think automation is going to affect this. This 5 minutes now becomes 22 seconds. This 10 minutes becomes a minute, right? Do you agree that if the bot is doing this and here's the cost of the bot, right? It becomes like an algebraic equation, right? And then we have this new stream that says this is it automated, because we can't automate all of it. Humans are still going to have to do some part of it. Maybe we get to 80%. So we've saved you 80% of, this large number, and people go, wow, that's crazy. And I'm like, it's not crazy. Let's go do it, right? Let's go seize the opportunity. Let's put cash back in your pocket.
Is there a lower bound? Like how do you measure if a project is either the ROI isn't there or it's too small? Like the company's too small or the project's too small, or what are the lower bounds for this?
It's very timely that you asked that. We had a company who was a friend of somebody who works here. And they said, oh, you got to come to it was a local government. It was a county in the state of New York. They said, oh, you have to come here and you have to bring RPA to us. And we said, absolutely, we're happy to do that. So we meet with them. And we're like, tell us about your finance department. And they said, well, there's two of us. And I said, oh, there's two of you, but two of you, like, and then there's the rest of the finance department. No, there's two people in finance. There was two people in HR. There was, it was a really small county. Apparently in New York, they have some of these really small jurisdictions. And when we looked at it, we said, for the investment, for the $50,000, $60,000 per process, right? It doesn't make sense. Given even if we saved you a ton of time, we would be 10, 15 years before we got any ROI. So what is the ROI that we really look for? We really look for a 1-year ROI that's optimal, right? Because then it becomes tangible. If I can say, hey, Dave, if you give me $5, I'm going to give you $10 at the end of the year. You're like, okay, that's a pretty good 100% investment return in a year. I'm in. But if I say, hey, in 10 years, if we still know each other and we're still alive and we still have ways to communicate, you'll get your $10. You're like, wow, there's way too much things that can happen in that time frame. I'm out on that. So a lot of times we look for 1 to 3 years. That really starts making sense. Anything longer than that, or where that ROI is drug out longer than that, it just doesn't make any sense.
Gotcha. So so just to be clear, it's a calculation of costs versus the savings, and essentially divide by 12 at some level because you're looking at the month. It's really get it back in a year is a generally good guideline.
I love it. Yeah, you make it sound really, it is that simple, really. People like to pretend and they have all these complex spreadsheets. And so at the end of the day, that's exactly what we look at.
Okay. I mean, oftentimes it is useful to just sort of simplify it. So how are you linking this sort of back to their strategy? What do you have to ask to understand how it impacts the business?
I like that. We always start with executive interviews, right? We really want to understand what's important to the business, right? Because sometimes you shouldn't automate things even though you can. So we had one customer and they told us our people are our most important thing, right? Our people, our culture, our people. And then they wanted to automate something that was extremely personal. It was the leaves process. And they were like, oh, we want them to fill out all this online and we want it to just be ingested by the bot and processed. And I was like, wait a minute. Like, people don't go on leaves take pregnancies out. People go on leave for maternity or paternity, and that's fine. But generally, any other reason that an employee goes on leave, that's some sort of event in their life, right? The death of a spouse, the death of a family member. They're in trauma. Do you really want that automated? Because, we've stopped people and said, like, this is a moment where the automation creates the availability for human-to-human contact. This is where I want to go, Dave. I'm really sorry to hear this. How can I help you? And we have two humans interacting. And in that moment of need, that is where technology creates the enablement for that to happen. That is not something that probably should be automated. So we'll pause and go, wait a minute, you want to automate this, but we heard that your vision and your ethics and your values and your morals and such dictate this. Are we sure? And oftentimes they're like, oh, that's a good catch. Yeah, we're willing to spend the money there.
Okay. So that's a really good kind of measurement. Is that your sort of number one? And give me a little insight in maybe the number 2 or 3, like reasons not to do things. Is the value of the human interaction kind of like the number one disqualifier for automating something?
It really is, right? Automation's really great at doing certain things. What it can't really do is emote. It can't really empathize and it can't sympathize, right? So when people I get kind of charged up when people go artificial intelligence in relation to RPA, because RPA is not artificially intelligent. It might look that way because it's doing a lot of automation, but it's not thinking per se. It's following very scripted rules. So really, whenever we need human intervention, we need thought, we need emotion. That's where we stop the bot and go, okay, let's have the bot that's done maybe the predecessing steps. Let's have the bot stop, give that to a human who can review it and go, okay, here's what I think. And then oftentimes, right, the bot can pick that back up based on which path we need to take. But that human step is really important around thought and around emotion.
All right, this might seem obvious, but for many, it may not be, and that's why I want to go down this road. So I would make a general assumption that customers, when you're presenting something with an ROI calculation, are essentially not worrying so much about cost anymore, right? Because they're measuring it. If I spend this, as you sort of said, I spend $1 and I get $2 back. If that dollar includes 6 zeros or 7 zeros, I don't really care because I'm getting that many dollars back. Is that what you're finding out in the market, that we've moved, that it's not a price competitive discussion anymore at all?
Yeah, it still is, right? They perceive a large investment, even though the licensing for the software is relatively low, right? We're talking, again, $10,000 to $20,000 depending on the technology you deploy. Sometimes even cheaper than that if you use SaaS models. But the ROI is there. So once people kind of move past that and go, okay, I know that there's value here, then it's, how do I get it, right? Where do I go? We focus on a lot of strategy up front because if you look at, and there's been some colossus failures in the space. There's been, hundreds of thousands, if not millions and many millions of dollars of missteps. People have done an RPA program for 2 years and then gone, oh, this is a disaster. And then they rebooted it and they started over. And what are they missing when you look at every one of those cases? I don't care if you're a small business or you're a really large hospital chain that might be located in Oakland, California, and you made a bazillion-dollar misstep. They're all missing the strategy, right? They get so excited about getting that value that you get people going, like, start this program, get these developers going, and you get a bunch of people doing a bunch of stuff. And there's no strategy, there's no governance, there's no plan around maintenance, right? Bots are digital workers. They need care and feeding too. They don't need pizza like some of the other developers, but they do need a plan for how you're going to maintain them and how you're going to monitor the environment so that when software changes and your robot breaks, you're ahead of that game and suddenly the whole process of paying your employees doesn't come to a stop.
All right, that sounds like learned experiences from failure. So I've got to ask, like, give me a little insight into kind of one of those issues, those catastrophes. Give me a little insight into that and what you took away from it.
Yeah. So the bots, the technology space, depending on the tool that you use, right? And there's literally, the last time I checked, there was well over 100 RPA technologies, software companies in the space. So they're all a little different. And there's some that are desktop automation kind of tools meant for an individual user to use. And there's some that are enterprise. But essentially, they all do the same thing where they robotically automate processes, right? So once we move past that, how do they do that becomes very important because some of them do it really behind the scenes, more like a Python programming kind of coding language. And some of them emulate a user on a web app, right? And they load their software. It presents itself on a browser, on a Chrome browser. And they say, oh, well, here's where the login field is. And they're very like that login field can't move. That login field moves. The bot goes, I can't log in. I don't know where the login field is. It's supposed to be here. It's not here, right? And think about how often software companies are modifying their software and changing names of forms and changing where things are and changing color schemas and such. Depending on the sophistication of the programmer and the developer of that bot and how they did it, that can break a bot. And then if you don't have governance, right, and you don't really know where your bots are, what they're doing, and so when something goes bump in the night and they change the software and your bot breaks and your process breaks, if you don't have that level of sophistication, then you're like, I don't know what happened, right? And now you're like trying to go back and look at all these bots and what are these bots doing, because there's no documentation, there's no governance, and it'll bring a company to its knees, right? Especially if it's a critical process like, vendor payments. It can stop a supply chain, right? And vendors put you on credit hold. If you're paying your employees, God forbid, employees are great. They love your company until you don't pay them. And then they just don't show up anymore, right? So we're really cautious about deploying vendors in the HR space because it affects talent and it affects people's livelihoods and their payroll. So we always create, for instance, we'll always have a bot. If we have payroll, we have one bot that does nothing but payroll. So if anything happens with payroll, we know we're only going to one bot and we're looking at that one bot. And it's very easy for us to very quickly go, okay, what are these bots doing? What got messed up? Okay, this bot, this process, and we can find it. So yeah,
So
a little bit of personal pain there.
I can hear it, and as I've listening, what I initially thought was a lot of kind of engagement, project-based engagement, also sounds like there's a component of kind of maintenance and ongoing engagement. Give me a little bit of a sense of the breakdown of the difference, like how much is initial strategy, how much is initial implementation, and how much ongoing maintenance and management is there in this process?
That's a great question, right? Because as soon as folks understand it and they get excited because they go to the vendors and the vendors say, these bots are amazing. And they're like, this is amazing. We got to get going. They want to deploy the bots so badly that they miss the first step, right? They miss strategy first because we want to deploy the bots. I'm 100% with you. Like I want to deploy the bots too because they're cool and then people get to see them. And then people are like, oh, what happens is we'll deploy them in finance and then supply chain goes, wait a minute. You have bots? Like, oh, that's real. I need bots. Hey, Dave, you run HR. Don't you need bots? Everybody needs bots. And pretty soon there's like this company-wide desire to have technology. But if we don't have a strategy, we don't know that we're doing the most valuable thing for the organization first, right? We still have a corporate responsibility to deploy the right bots in the right place with the most value at the right time. And then we try to build what we call a center of excellence. We try to really like, while we're building the bots, you don't want consultants there forever, right? We're expensive. So we try to say like, hey, Dave's a really good kind of guy in accounting. He really gets this. And then we'll have the conversations with the company to say, hey, maybe we need to develop a skill set in Dave that he can like do this kind of for you as well and at least maintain it, right? So we try to build some self-sufficiency. We have an 18-month model that we say in the first 6 months, let us just do it all, right? Let's get some value in the organization. Let's get some bots deployed. Next 6 months, let's work shoulder to shoulder with some people we've identified, like Dave, and let's build that skill set. And we're right there with us, and he's learning and he's growing and he's understanding like what it takes to maintain these bots. We're building things like how much FTE do we need? Not, right? We've saved FTE doing the process. Some of that needs to be reserved for maintaining the bots. You know, if we deploy a bot, maybe 0.10 of an FTE needs to be allocated towards maintaining the technology, applying patches, and continuing to grow that bot. And then at the end of those 12 months, right, Dave's pretty good. Dave's kind of got this, right? Dave understands these bots and he's worked with developers and now he's like, okay, I can build simple and medium bots. And then maybe the consulting firm falls back into an advisory capacity. So Dave's got this one bot that the CFO really wants Dave to build. Well, that's kind of a hairy, scary beast. I'm not quite sure. Okay, great. We can be advisory. And again, you keep growing, right? And now at the end of 18 months, for the most part, we're like, you now have a center of excellence around automation. I don't want to get hung up on just RPA. I like to say it's automation because it might be RPA, it might be other things, right? And the organization is like self-sufficient. And that's when I get to sit back and go, okay, this was cool, you know?
Well, that's a nice positive note to end on. So if people are interested in learning more about RPA and the process, where do you direct them?
Definitely, they can come to our website, which is rpic.com. If they're interested in talking to me directly, I, like Dave, have a podcast with lots of information out there, and that is at techprounicorn.com. And all my contact info is there as well. And I'm always happy to help, right? No charge. I just want folks to take advantage of an enabling technology that can save their employees some time and save them some cost.
Awesome. Michael, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your time and attention. Time is a finite resource, and I really value you giving me some of yours. If you like this video, you can let me know with a like of the video, and even more valuable, hitting the subscription button. My content is all free, and I use metrics like subscriptions to pay the bills, so it has real value. The content here is produced under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. If you're interested in more content like this, you can get access to content early via our Patreon at patreon.com/MSPradio. It's our give what you want model where you set the value of what you think the content is worth. If you like this podcast, you can catch it daily as the 5-minute news and commentary show, The Business of Tech, available on all your favorite podcatchers with links at businessof.tech. Just hit that big blue button to subscribe. Again, thank you for taking time out of your day to listen, and I really value the interaction. If you want to say something in the comments, I do respond and watch all that, and I look forward to talking to you next time.